Yahweh, always trying to reel in the savages that he created. From the Old Testament to the New, abject failure after abject failure. Hi, I'm Laurentia. Welcome to the Doubter's Diary. If you're new, welcome. If you're coming back, thank you so much. I appreciate you. Today, we're going to talk about the 5 failures that I can think about off the top of my head of God. I know that there are others. The Bible is littered with the ways that he cannot seem to reel in his creation. But these are the 5 that I remember and know off the top of my head. You guys are so well studied and so smart that I know you'll come up with more comment, and I will take those comments and we'll make a part 2 of this if I get any good ones. So let's get started with God's first epic failure in his creation, and that would be Satan and the angels that rebelled against God. This comes pre-Genesis, according to the Bible or according to Christian tradition. So traditionally, Christians use Isaiah 14:12 through 15 and Ezekiel 28:12 through 19 to describe Satan as exceedingly beautiful, one of God's most dazzling creations. So I guess I picture a Brad Pitt face with an Arnold body from the 1980s, not today, and maybe a Denzel Washington charm, right? He's so beautiful. Now, is this supported by the Bible? Not really. Christians use Ezekiel to say that Lucifer is Satan, and he's not. That is a complete gross misinterpretation of who Satan is. So that's a video for another day, but we're going to just go with it, even though I know that's not really a correct interpretation. But this is what Christians think about Satan. He was this beautiful angel, one of God's most dazzling creations, and yet God could not keep his most beautiful creation under control. Because what does Satan do? Satan rebels against God and takes, I believe it might be, 1/3 of the angels with him. I'll have to check on that. I'm not sure, but I know he takes a whole bunch of the angels with him. So his very first creations that we know about, the angels, he can't even keep his most powerful, second in command under control, and Satan is gone. So Satan rebels, and since that time, he has wreaked havoc all over the rest of God's creation. But the Bible tells us that Satan will be getting his just desserts sometime. We don't know when. I don't know why. Maybe you guys can tell me why Satan is still wreaking havoc all over the world. But his first big coup is with Adam and Eve. So that brings us to the second epic failure of God. So at some later date, God creates Adam and Eve. Maybe he's very sad about Satan being gone and he needs some other little play toy. So he creates the earth and he creates Adam and Eve. And what a bomb that turned out to be, right? It seems as though Satan gets in the garden, now in the form of a snake, and that's actually not true either. And I have a video all about the snake and Satan in the garden, so I will link that above. And go watch it. That made the Christians go wild. You'll love it. But we're going to just go with what Christians think. And most Christians think that the snake in the garden with Adam and Eve was Satan. So Satan decides to tempt Adam and Eve with eating from the fruit of the tree that they're not supposed to. And wouldn't you know it, Adam and Eve fail with their very first temptation. The first time somebody tempts them, whether it be a snake or Satan, they fail. Isn't that incredible that God made such weakling creatures in his own image, remember, that cannot survive one temptation? Okay, so here we are with God 0 for 2 in his creations. So Adam and Eve, as we know, they go out into the world and their offspring form a cesspool. We're still in Genesis. We haven't even gotten out of the first book of the Bible. Cesspool. So ungodly horrible that God says, I have to kill every single person on the planet, including the innocent animals, the babies, the toddlers, because it's all horrible. But I'm going to save Noah and his 3 sons, and I'm going to start all over again. And this time, because they're so pure of heart, this time it's going to be good. So we know what God does. He drowns the entire earth. He kills every single thing on the earth except for 2 of every kind of animal, or 7, depending on the animal, and God's 3 are Noah and his 3 sons. And wouldn't you know it, that doesn't work either, does it? Because it doesn't take very many generations before the earth is now a cesspool again. So I have no idea if God is all-knowing and he knew what would happen anyway. I really don't know why he kept Noah and his 3 sons alive, knowing that their descendants were going to be just as bad as Adam and Eve's descendants. But anyway, that brings us to God's next failure, which would be the Tower of Babel, which happened at some point after the flood. I believe, not Bible scholars, but fundamentalist Christians, I'm not going to ever call them Bible scholars, think that this happened maybe a few hundred years or something after Noah. So after the flood, all the people lived in one area, and it was the city of Babel. So they're all living together, and the people decide, we're going to build a tower up to the heavens. And God came down, and he saw that they were building a tower. Now, keep in mind, at that time, scholars think that ancient peoples could probably build about a 3-story building with the technology they had. So they might have made it to 3 stories. And God comes down. And let's catch up with the story in Genesis 11, 5 through 9. The Lord came down to the city and tower which mortals had built. And the Lord said, look, they are one people and they have one language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do. Nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language there, so that they will not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore it was called Babel, because the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord scattered them abroad all over the face of the earth. So God is, he's worried that, if they can build this 3-story building, what else can they do? So his plan was to confuse our language, spread us all over, and therefore we could never cooperate with each other, and we could never build tall buildings or fly airplanes or go to the moon. We would never be able to do all that stuff. But is that true? No, that was another failure of God. It didn't take too long after that, right? Before the Egyptians were building huge pyramids that stand to this day, far bigger than 3 stories. We fly every day, right? Flying in an airplane 33,000 feet in the sky is now a mundane thing. Who doesn't do that? I fly several times in a year. So far, God's little plan didn't work. So strike 4 for God, and we're not even out of Genesis yet. But we're going to skip ahead, and we're going to go to the New Testament, to God's greatest failure, the biggest failure that he ever did. Okay, before we get to God's biggest failure, can you please like and subscribe? And I will be having channel memberships available. So I will link that in the description if you're interested. I appreciate your support so much. Thank you. And I appreciate it. Okay, so let's get to God's biggest failure. And I bet most of you know what that is, or who that is. That would be his only begotten son, Jesus Christ. Now, I know a lot of the Christians, if you're watching, you're going to be very offended. I would have been, if you had talked to me only a few years ago, I would have been incredibly offended, because Jesus Christ was my friend. I talk about in another video, actually in another interview I did with the harmonic atheist, and I talked about how Jesus was my friend. I never connected with the God, the Father, but I connect them to Jesus. And so I understand if you're horribly offended, because I certainly would have been. But Jesus Christ is God's biggest failure. And why is that? Well, if you, let's talk about who are Christians. If you talk about the world globally, only 32% of the world's population identifies as Christians. And most Christians don't even recognize each other as such. In fact, half of all those Christians are Catholics who are not Christians according to the Protestants. And Catholics don't believe the Protestants are Christians, except for maybe Episcopalians and Lutherans. So somebody has to be wrong. So let's cut that number in half, and we'll say 16% of the world's population, current world's population, are really Christians. That's 16%. So that means the vast and overwhelming majority of the people living today are going to be going to hell. By any measure, that's a total flop, right? So God went through everything he went through to get 16% of the world's population to heaven. That's the currently. But let's go back in time. That's just today. Let's go back in time. Historians think that billions, probably 117 billion people have populated the earth since the beginning of time. 117 billion. Let that sink in. We only have about 6 billion on the earth right now. Out of those, how many do you think are Christians? How many of those, a few billion? Maybe, okay, let's just say it's 10%. Let's say all the people that have ever lived, we're talking the Chinese, we're talking the Native Americans, so we're talking globally. Maybe 10%. Maybe a few billion of those went to heaven. The rest of them didn't. And that was Jesus Christ's only job, was to save the world, right? He came down, he got his disciples together, and they were supposed to go throughout the whole world and save it. How long did it take for them to get to the Chinese or the Native American? They failed. Jesus Christ and his apostles failed, and they failed wildly. So if you're a Christian and you've stuck with me through this whole video, I want to ask you a question. I sincerely mean this, and I had to ask myself this own question. Why would you trust a God who is such a failure? This is a God whose plans have never panned out, never. Or he doesn't think them through very well, or he doesn't know. But regardless, what the Bible says about an all-knowing, all-powerful God is completely false. Why would you trust a God like that? Why would you trust anyone with such a high failure rate? This is the person, the being that you're trusting with your children, with your health, with your life, with your soul, with your everlasting eternity. How do you know that his plans for you are correct? You don't. And I didn't. And that's why I left, because this is not a God. Even if I don't believe he exists. Okay. In my mind, this God never existed. But if he did, why would I think that his plan to demolish Satan is going to work? Why would I think that? So that's my parting question to you. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate you. Like and subscribe.